Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Turn Bark Time. I'm the Turn,
I'm the Bark.
and we're still going to be here a long time. Welcome, everybody, to Season 3, Episode 2, and Episode 51. Barker, what are we going to talk about today? You had the idea for this one, and I'm loving it. Actually, do we need to shout out our previous episode, though, last season. So there are these hippos. Let me tell you about them, Barker. They live in Colombia.
Colombia, not Colombia.
Yeah.
That's a river in Washington.
Yeah.
Colombia.
So they live in Colombia. But we did an episode on the cocaine hippos of Colombia. And we actually were texting each other back in October that the hippos are now being treated as humans and people in the United States court system.
No, I think it's the court system in there. They're considered people of interest, and the purpose of doing it was so that American experts could bring in evidence because they want to change the sterilization chemicals or methods that they're using to try and stop the invasive spread
of hippos.
Los hippopotamus de cocaína. Right? Sounds so much cooler that way.
It does. It really does. Anything in a foreign language usually sounds cooler, though. But we just wanted to update you on that because we forgot to mention it back on episode 50 that we had that.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Yeah, who knows what the courts could do? That could be our next court case we could talk about. So today we're talking about we're spitballing, like we said, we talk about usually an hour to 2 hours before we actually sit down and record. So last Wednesday when we were recording, we were talking about Barker's AP world history class, and we were saying like what kind of topics could we talk about with that. We've covered a lot of American history topics and not a lot of Washington State history topics, but that's something that I just teach uniquely. So we were having this conversation, and Barker's like, why not just throw out like Genghis Khan? And I was like, yeah, because that's like not just a 1-part episode. That's like a 10-part episode. So we are going to discuss the man, the myth, the legend. 1 in 200 people are related to him. Genghis Khan.
Temujin.
Yeah.
All right, Barker. So everybody knows, like, I guess, well, not everybody knows. People aren't very smart sometimes. Anyways, there's a very important, everybody's favorite Mongolian is Genghis Khan. If there's one Mongolian that everybody knows, it's Genghis Khan. But kind of like Jesus Christ, like his name actually isn't Genghis Khan.
No.
Right? So Genghis or Chinggis, depending on how you translate it, because there's different ways to turn Chinese into English sounding words, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because they're still Chinese, but you're just trying to pronounce it using English alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
So he is called by multiple things. His name's not actually Genghis Khan.
Yes. So Khan means like leader, and then Genghis means like leader of the leaders. You know what I mean? He starts off rough upbringing. He actually gets like kicked out of his village, comes back, and kind of has this tumultuous like growing up. And again, everything is kind of, take it with a grain of salt, because the Mongolians are a nomadic horse people, not centaurs. I always have to say that in class. Anytime I say a nomadic horse people, I'm like,
they're not actually horses.
Yeah, like well, it's just like when you say animal husbandry and people start saying Enumclaw. No,
no, easy, man.
But you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here? And it's like, it just means that they raise animals, right? They're they're like the Plains Indians. They have the horses, and the horses help them move around and help them do stuff. So anyway, he rises to power. He goes through there's kind of an election system where they pick like who's the leader of all the Mongols, and he convinces everybody that he should be the leader of the Mongols. And essentially they go on a tear, and they just start in China. They go after the Jin Chinese, and they're like, we're gonna go knock them out. And they just kind of keep going from there. And like, so if you don't know anything about Mongols, just basic things about Mongols is they ride horses. They're renowned for being great horse archers. He used the decimal system. Take that, America.
Yeah.
He broke units into groups of like tens, hundreds, and thousands.
Oh, you mean the
And then
metric system, not the decimal system.
Whatever. Decimal system, metric system, same thing.
Yeah.
Things by tens. I was talking about this with my kids the other day. I was like, how many feet are in a yard? And they're like, 3. And I'm like, good job. And I'm like, how many yards are in a mile? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, me neither.
Well, it's 5,286 feet divided by 3. I don't want to do that right now.
It's like 1,700-ish.
And the only reason I know that number is from Remember the Titans. How many feet are in a mile? How many feet are in a mile? 5,286 feet. You're a pink ball, you run every one of them. Sorry.
Yeah. But then we had, but it's kind of interesting because you think about the Mongols and they kind of have this stigma that they're barbarians, when in reality, like, they were very organized and very like thoughtful and very disciplined in like how they conducted warfare. One of the things that Genghis Khan is really good at is he actually kind of creates like military intelligence, like scout units, which is what cavalry units should be. You send them out and they kind of lay out the terrain. And they go, well, one of the strategies they would use is they would engage the enemy and then run away and feign retreat, like, oh no, you beat us. And then generally people want to chase you down when you're retreating, and then they would lead them into ambushes or like into more advantageous areas for the Mongols to fight. So I mean, from that standpoint, I think that's kind of a stigma of the entire like Mongolian empire that is inappropriate. I mean, it doesn't really kind of match up with what the facts would say.
Well, we can mark off the fact that, like, when we talk about like the skilled warfare on horseback, right, that the Mongols used, again, with that strategy, they were able to spread very fast and get to their place where they're going, right? You still had, if I'm correct, you still had some foot soldiers, or am I forgetting that? Am I messing that up? For the most part,
you would have to at some point.
Yeah, but it's
they have to fight siege battles. When they get into like, I can't remember if it was Samarkand or somewhere in kind of like what would be Central Asia, like somewhere in the stands, like Uzbekistan or Kyrgyzstan. But like, they have to like fight block by block, which, I mean, urban fighting doesn't lend itself to horseback fighting.
No, but like one of the things like is that when they could move, though, like that was the thing, like when people would go to fight them, like they could move pretty quickly. And the reason they kind of get that barbaric thing is because well, you had like the things like the heads, right, like the skulls and stuff like that, like being piled up as like a warning sign, like, hey, you surrender, or this is kind of a thing. But also you got to look at who writes the history, right? So a lot of our history that we get might be interactions that Westerners had with the Mongols. And it's a completely different lifestyle, which, as history has shown us, Westerners tend to just call it savagery and just move on. So
yeah, and I mean, like, Genghis Khan was good at PR. Now, not PR as in like he's out kissing babies. He's out like, if I ask you to surrender, or I'll murder you and your baby.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was some people question the idea of when they were like, well, there were piles of skulls. They're like, there's no physical historical evidence. There's no pile of bones in the spot where there should be a pile of bones to substantiate that. Right. So unless a bunch of African swallows with a piece of bark under their dorsal guidal feather carried away all the skulls.
Love it.
It doesn't hold much water. But it goes back to that Europe painting the Mongols as kind of like the boogeymen, right? This big evil thing that's coming from the east.
Yeah.
But there are some that are true. So like when he was coming down into Persia, the area that's Persia or Iran, there was a governor that refused to surrender. And when eventually he takes over the city, he melts down gold and silver and pours it in the eyes and the ears of the governor. And obviously the human body doesn't handle that very well. And if you're familiar with Game of Thrones, that's where Game of Thrones has the, dang it, they literally just like George R.R. Martin like lifted the idea of Mongols and put them in there. Instead of being Khans, they're Khals.
Oh, okay.
Right. What I mean? And they ride horses and they ride across the steppes of Westeros instead of the steppes of Asia. The Dothraki is what they're called in the show. Okay. But anyway, the Dothraki are legit the Mongols minus bows and arrows. But they have like, but anyway, it's a lot of things like there's a character that's killed with molten metal the same way. And I'm like, oh, they straight up just lifted that from history. And they're like,
Yep.
this guy's Genghis Khan.
Yep.
And then like there's some of the stories that people associate with like the barbarity, like the terrible ways that like Mongolians killed people wasn't done by Genghis Khan. Some of it was done by people under his command. And then one of the ones that's the most horrific was done by like his rival, which was to boil people alive,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't even want to think about it. Like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle.
Yeah.
But
No.
the other one that is always kind of a macabre but interesting story is that when they get up into I think they're fighting the Rus, right? So they're up in what will eventually be Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this rule where if you're a nobleman, they can't spill your blood. So what the general does is he like digs a little pit, they tie him up, they put him in there, they bury them under the dirt, and then they put like the platform on top of it that the general's going to eat dinner on, and they essentially just smoosh them to death, and they like suffocate them, or they either choke to death or they're crushed to death. Well, it's the same thing. It's going to happen both ways, but it doesn't cause them. You're not spilling their blood. You're still killing them, but you didn't break the rules,
right?
Because you didn't spill their blood. You know what I mean? So I think that's the stuff that people remember, or using people as human shields.
Yeah.
But I mean, part of that is you're trying to establish, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's way easier if you can just get people to capitulate and give up rather than to have to go through and besiege every city.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, and again, like one of the cool things, like again, they get that horror, right? It's the scary thing, like the Mongols are coming, like it's a terrifying aspect. And again, that's his PR campaign. But he actually had a lot of good things that he did in the areas that he controlled, right? Because again, Khan's an emperor, so he controls it, and he will conquer an area that will be the largest empire the world has ever seen. Could you make an argument behind the British Empire in the 1800s? I mean, because obviously, like, he controlled.
I think the claim that they use is he has the largest continuous land
empire. Okay, yeah,
land
absolutely.
empire.
Yep, no arguments there. So I mean, you're talking pretty much controlling. I wouldn't say. I'd say like basically the middle band of Asia, from southwest to southeast, all the way through China and everything like that. He never fully conquers India, I believe, but gets all the way to like Europe's doorstep. And so it's one of those things that's known. But like what I found interesting when I was doing some reading on him is his religious tolerance policy. Like he himself, like the Mongol belief system is that religion is something that's super close and super personal. So it's not something that's supposed to be judged or interfere with law or anything like that. Like one's religion is what it is. And although you have like your own religion, you're going to allow other people to practice that, and including like people of religion, like men of the cloth and things like that, got a tax exemption from there, which is kind of nuts. Like when you think about that, because you think about like the Crusades, right, going on and everything like that, and how it's religion fighting religion. Here's this dude like conquering all of Asia, and he's like, oh yeah, cool, you do your thing. Live your life.
There's a story that. And again, all of these stories that you take with a grain of salt, because it's not like somebody sat around and was like the chronicler of, the Khan.
That would have been great, but
yeah. But I think it was a Muslim city, and then again, it's in that. I think it was the Karakatai Empire, which is where the Abbasids were, so it's like Iraq, kind of the Middle East. Kind of, right? And he sits there and says, well, maybe if you hadn't been so sinful, God wouldn't have essentially, I'm like the vengeance of like your God. Like if you would have been more devout and lived better, maybe your God wouldn't have let me happen to you. You know what I mean? And that's like, wow.
A pretty ballsy statement.
Yeah. And the other thing that he did, so like he also realized that like Mongolia like needed a written language if you're going to rule. Like you need to write stuff down, and so rather like there was no Mongolian written language, so he adopts it's a Uyghur script.
Yeah.
So the Uyghurs, be a topic for another day too.
Yeah.
The Uyghurs are ethnically Turkic people that live in China. So they're non-Chinese people that China's trying to get rid of right now. But we don't want the algorithm to bite us. But topic for another day. He adopts their writing system and says, hey, we'll just write stuff. You guys have a writing system, write our stuff down. And so like he's big in, one of the things that sets him apart is that he establishes like a meritocracy. Again, like he recognizes, hey, you're not related to me, but you're really good at doing what you do. Like, I'll give you a job. And they recognize that as the Mongols expand, right, they're nomads. They're nomadic, warriors. They know nothing about they're not good at being sedentary city rulers.
Yep.
And so rather than trying to put the round peg in the square hole, or the square peg in the round hole, I guess, he just says, hey, you guys already know how to do this. Stay loyal to me. And then he ingratiates people to himself and says, hey, if you're loyal to me, I'll treat you well. And if you're, it's kind of like almost like a mobster in a way where it's like, if you cross me, it'll be the last thing you do.
Right.
So I'll end you and I'll end your family and things like that. But he would also he was what was the phrase I saw? He was a very successful patriarch, is what they said.
That's one way to say it.
Genghis Khan has 6 wives, and this is a low estimate. I read another article earlier. It says 500 concubines, but I'm thinking those are consistent women.
Maybe those are low,
in like a harem situation.
Yeah.
But I swear I read an article. I couldn't find it again. But I swear I saw one that estimated that he had relations with like between 2,000 to 3,000 women. And I know that there was a practice of when they would conquer a city, they would essentially, his soldiers would go out and essentially try and collect the prettiest women and essentially present them to him,
as a gift.
And then he would pick, who he wanted and whatnot. He has, I think, what is it? There's 4 sons that are from his first wife, that are kind of recognized as the guys that take, like, those are going to be the heirs. But then there's other estimates that say he recognized, like, probably had way more kids than that, but they're illegitimate kids. And that's where you get the modern equivalent where they say that, what is it, 0.5% of all the men in the world?
Yeah, 0.5%.
Yeah. 1 in 200?
1 in 200 people can trace their
the men can trace their Y chromosome back to Genghis Khan.
Yep.
Which is roughly between 16 and 17 million people.
Yeah.
Which is pretty crazy when you think about it.
Well, think about it. We always talk about leaving an impact on the world.
Yeah.
That's
and apparently one of his sons had 22 sons, and another one of them had like between like 30 and 50. Right.
Wow.
So the idea, I guess, monogamy was not.
I mean, it wasn't a part of their culture.
Yeah.
It wasn't considered this isn't like today, like obviously we would think of that as a super negative thing, and that's just something that you don't do. But like in his time, it's considered normal. Yeah, it's let's see. I'm looking at a couple of them. I saw 500. I saw over 500 is what it says. It says 6 Mongolian wives, over 500. Trying to find something that would be.
Well, but I mean, concubine implies that like you're there for more. It's not just a one night stand. You're there,
right? Absolutely, yeah.
As part of like a retinue. So I mean, it would not be outside of the realm of thinking to think that there were more women than just those.
I think the phrase you were looking for, he was the most prolific patriarch.
Prolific, that was the word. Talk about Darwin's definition of survival of the fittest, right?
No kidding.
The most kids.
Yep.
And one of the other things, getting back to kind of obviously copulating with women without their permission is not necessarily a benefit. No. He leads to a time period, like he kind of transitions from the expansive, like, let's just run over everybody into a time period where he says, okay, let's hold on to what we have, and he shifts gears, and people call it Pax Mongolica, which is I think it's a play on where it's they're trying to make it sound like Pax what is it, Romana or something like that.
Yeah.
The Roman peace.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like this idea of like where they ruled and they governed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, I guess, the biggest impact that people like miss is that he allows the Silk Road to prosper.
Yeah.
The trade routes that come across from China to Europe, think about, Marco Polo and what he wrote.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first time in history that the entire trade network was underneath a single government. And the government, he transitioned, instead of the warriors going out and pillaging and doing that, their job turned into you're now going to patrol these areas and make sure that there are no marauders and bandits that try and rob people on these trade routes. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of crazy. It breaks the mold in your brain. We generally associate with Mongols as this scary thing, right? This the grasshoppers from Ant's Life, coming in and taking stuff, and we've got to do what they say or they're going to hurt us, kind of a deal.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, they actually lead to one of the greatest, great growth in the economy and cultural exchange. They're the ones who bring gunpowder, much to the demise of chagrin of Constantinople.
Yeah.
But they're, they were really good at recognizing that people that they conquered knew stuff they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
The Chinese knew how to make paper. The Chinese knew how to make siege weapons, right? You can't be nomadic. You can't just run cavalry units into a sea wall
yeah.
and defeat the wall. And so like they were like, hey, help us build siege weapons. And then they got into gunpowder, and then they moved further west and were like, well, you guys know how to make bells. What if we put gunpowder in like a bottom of a bell-shaped deal, and it was really long, and then it'll shoot stuff out of the bell, right? And it's kind of the birthplace of like this thought of these mixing of at least a cultural diffusion, right? Where you have ideas that are coming from China, the Far East, with some ideas of South Asia, with the Middle East, and then into European thought, and with their powers combined, right? We get the martial use of gunpowder, which in the grand scheme of the human race isn't super great for us, but
sorry, Native Americans. Sorry, Aztecs.
Anybody.
Yeah, true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, gunpowder has not been a good thing.
A kid asked me about it the other day. It was like, because we were talking about, in regular world, we're talking about Safavids, and he was like, can gunpowder be used for anything? Like, is there like a non-aggressive use of gunpowder? And I'm like,
fireworks.
The only thing I can think of is fireworks. But other than that, it's like gunpowder is used for guns, to blow stuff up, like to clear debris, or in fireworks. Like nobody ever sat there and like essentially like made a cannon with wheels on it where you like sat on it, lit the cannon, and it blew you down the road. You know what I mean? Nobody ever did that.
It'd be pretty loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, because I mean, gunpowder is just invented for fireworks is the main purpose. It was a celebratory thing, and then they do learn. I mean, the Chinese use it, start adapting it to use it for handheld cannons, basically, and then it turns into more distinguished weapons. So, yeah, it's just he's an interesting guy. Like he's it's kind of like you said. I like the description where you made the comparison, like kind of almost like Jesus Christ in the sense where he's mythical, but he's also real. And so it's kind of every story you hear, you have to be like, okay, is there, written record to back it up? The answer is probably no, from a primary source, or it's a primary source from a different time that is trying to collaborate what happened. So, but yeah.
When you think about bias, the person who's the author of the primary source is either a person who is being paid or is writing so that the Mongolian ruling class will be happy with them. So that's their bias. Or on the flip side, it's somebody who's saying, oh no, here come the Mongols, and the Mongols are this evil horde of things.
Right.
So there's not really anybody who was, what's the word I'm looking for? Were you lacking bias? You're just
neutral.
Objective, yeah, right. Neutral or
Yeah.
objective.
Yeah.
You have no objective chroniclers. But I think
Yeah.
that's important to recognize is that history's like that's what history or historiography is, right?
Yeah.
Why are they writing the history the way they're writing it?
Yeah.
And so when these people say, like, yes, he murdered men, the men, the women, the children, and they're all gone. And it's like, yeah, there was a massive depopulation that happens, but you have to put it into perspective too, that the Black Death rolls through
Yep.
and kills people. And again, that's kind of aided by the Mongols because they've now made this great transcontinental trade route
Mm-hmm.
that's very consistent and very safe. Well, now the rats can go from, the Gobi Desert area all the way to Europe.
Yep.
And so some of that gets blamed. People are like, well, the Mongols came through and now everybody's dead. But it's like, it wasn't necessarily all the Mongols that killed everybody.
Yeah.
It's like, did they kill people? Yes. I'm not saying that they were like super nice dudes.
Yeah.
They're known for being brutal, but it's like, sometimes it could be exaggerated by other factors. Like, yes, you get there and then like, maybe the women and the children are gone, but they weren't necessarily murdered. They could have been sent back to Mongolia as slaves.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, they're gone from where they were, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're dead and they were murdered.
Right.
But if you're from Europe, you really, it's yellow journalism before we coin the term.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's always a bias in history, and that's one of the things you have to
constantly be looking for. Yep. We were looking at that today. Like side note is we've been doing, we watched the John Adams Boston Massacre trial. My students read the account of Captain Thomas Preston and the account of Robert Goddard. Obviously, if you've watched our Boston Massacre episode, Robert Goddard's testimony is complete horse poo. Well, Captain Thomas Preston is telling the truth because he knows he's going to get hung if not. But then we were watching, I don't think I've ever noticed this. Have you ever noticed on America, the Story of Us, right? They talk about the guy, the printer Smith, I think his name's, oh no, I'm thinking of the Pilgrims. I'm trying to remember his name. But anyway, there's like a printer's apprentice, and they show him getting hit with like the butt of the rifle, right? Like, or the musket, getting hit in the jaw. And then he stands back up and he spits out the blood and whatever. And then they say Private Hugh Montgomery gets hit with a club. And so he gets hit with the club and he falls down. But instead of the gun going off, right, like the story is, right, like, or he sidesteps and fires, it literally shows on America's Story of Us him cocking his musket and pulling the trigger at the crowd, which we know is not true. That didn't happen. Like, and I was just like, telling my class, I was like, why is the History Channel showing this when we know it's not true and they know it's not true? And so it's like always that bias of looking to like, how do you make yourself look like this is okay? It's the same discussion we've had when we did that episode. I think it was like episode 4 or 5, where it's like, why do we still call it a massacre? Like, we know it wasn't a massacre. It was the 200th anniversary or 250th anniversary, I think, last year in December. So it was like, but why are we still calling this a massacre? Anyway, bias.
But last week's episode was only a slaughter.
Yeah.
250 people, only a slaughter.
Only a slaughter. So, although on their website, on the National Parks website, it does call it a massacre. So,
rightfully so.
Yeah. So, Barky, anything more, Genghis Khan?
A few things. So, it's interesting because throughout history, there's been a couple of governments, like during the Soviet Union era, the Soviet era, they significantly tried to downplay the role of Genghis Khan because they were trying to show how great the Rus were, right? It's about how great Russia or the Soviet Union, but it's mostly Russia, how great they are. And so like, you don't want to talk about like the Mongols because the Mongols kicked your crap. And then just recently, within the last year, France was going to have a museum showing about Genghis Khan, and the Chinese government like came in and was like, hey, you can't say Genghis Khan. So like, there's kind of like, there could be kind of like this low key movement to be like, China wants to downplay the significance of Genghis Khan again, because it doesn't serve their story of them, right? Like their story of us, China's story of us. We don't want to talk about Genghis Khan. It's like, well, just ignore that part and talk about all the other great stuff we have to do.
Yeah.
And it's, it's interesting in that regard, where I think the United States is at a point now where we recognize that we've made mistakes and that we screw stuff up, and that we not necessarily welcome, but like we're having those conversations, whether they're uncomfortable or everybody wants to have them or not.
Right.
Where you actively have governments that are going, no, he's not that big of a deal. And it's like, dude, he's the reason that the Ming Dynasty rebuilt parts of the wall.
Yeah.
Like the Great Wall of China that we see today was built by the Ming Dynasty after they pushed out the Yuan Dynasty, which was Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, right? I mean, so you can't, it's just so hard for me to be like, you can't just completely cut out a piece of history you don't like, does Germany just go, we're not going to talk about the 1930s?
Yeah, nothing happened between 1939 and
1930s, 1945, nothing happened.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that's interesting with history. And it really, I don't like, I mean, it's a nativist mindset that China has, where they're trying to protect the idea that their culture, much like the Europeans, is dominant and it's supreme, superior, yep. Right? And when you have those narratives where it's like, well, here's where these nomadic horse people came in and rocked your country and essentially took it over for, a couple of generations.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we don't want to talk about that.
No.
You know what I mean? So I just thought that was interesting, kind of reading through some stuff, kind of going like, people going like, you can't, having the conversation with kids that history can change, and depending on where you're at, the version of history that you get is different.
Oh yeah. I mean, even you look at our country, state to state, right? There's still some states or some areas of states where they teach, the U.S. American Civil War as the war between the states.
War of Northern Aggression.
Well, that too, but I wasn't going to go quite that far. But yeah, so it's one of those things where it's like you can get a different story depending on where you are at, and that is not unheard of at all. So, but yeah, interesting topic. Should we? We'll record. So we're recording a little early, which is cool because we finally figured out that we can just drop our episodes. We don't have to just record them every Wednesday night. So, but yeah, give us a shout out. We're at 199 for followers. Pretty exciting. So
we almost have hundreds.
Cool. Yeah, 199 subscribers. So on our YouTube channel, and our Instagram is not popping, but that's okay. It doesn't mean our art game is not crushing it. Which, Barker, you are head of marketing and you're doing a great job. So
I'll give myself a bonus check.
You should multiply it by 10.
50 times 0 is still
zero. Yep. Not wrong.
But we're not here for the money. We're here for you.
Yep. Always here for you. So again, if you have topics, Barker's daughter, Emma, had a topic for us and I kind of like it. You want to run with it?
Yeah. So we're going to shoot for next week.
Yep. Barring
a major legal move forward by the hippopotamus de cocaína of Colombia. Cocaína. Unless those cocaine hippos, make a step forward in their legal process and they, revive Johnny Cochran or something. I think we're going to roll with Emma's topic, which is we're going to talk about our favorite childhood cartoons.
Oh yeah. So if you would like to, we'll throw out a poll too on our Instagram, and we'll throw it out on Barker and my own personal Instagram as well. For favorite cartoons. We have our own. We'll probably talk about, we usually get to talk about what, like 2 or 3 of our favorites?
Yeah, this one's gonna be hard for me. Like I'm trying to sit there and like I don't have an immediate go-to answer.
I have 2 that pop into my head really quick. So but that'll be saved. If anyone knows me or has anyone ever seen me on a Zoom call recently, they know my all-time favorite cartoon. So but anyway, all right, guys, you have a fantastic night. So, Barker, if there's nothing else, I'm the turn.
I'm the bark.
And we're going to wow, brain fart. Let's try this again. I'm the turn.
I'm the bark.
And we're going to be here a long time, obviously, by the way I'm talking. Good night, everybody.
Be safe.
Yep, and be well.
Man, that was struggle bus hard.